All right, welcome to another session of Kaiju Masterclass. I am one of the organizers of the event, Kyle Byrd.
And I'm Matt Parmley.
And we are here to talk to William, or well, he wants us to call him Bill Stout, who has a pretty diverse body of work, from comic books, movies, and we're mostly going to focus on things in his career in film. Of course, the most notable for this audience that we're going to focus in a lot on is the 1983 Godzilla 3D movie, which was the first attempt at an all-American Godzilla film. Of course, that did not get made. We're going to chat with him about that and some of the other projects he's done over the years. So I guess before we kind of get into that, Bill, at what point in your life did you decide you wanted to be an artist?
I was drawing ever since I was a little kid. I would do cartoons that for me were serious, but made my parents laugh. So I loved getting that reaction from them. I mean, the earliest drawing I can remember is I drew a prisoner inside a prison, and I had heard that the only thing they fed you in prison was beans. So he's eating beans, and then out of his butt it's going toot toot. Parents thought that was hilarious, so I kept doing stuff like that. My big passion was science and math, though. I was a science math major in high school, and in the fifth grade, my fifth grade teacher caught me drawing in class when I should have been listening. But instead of punishing me, he said, "Do you have any more drawings like that?" And the kid next to me said, "Oh, you should see it. He's got a whole book of monster drawings." And I was just happy not to get in trouble. He asked if he could see that book of monster drawings the next day. So I went home, and it dawned on me when the kid said monsters, I was thinking Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman. What the teacher was thinking was dinosaurs. So I didn't want to disappoint that teacher. So I spent the rest of the evening filling up the book with dinosaur drawings. The next day I brought it in. And from that moment on, he began to give me extracurricular art activities. He'd say, he knew that I wanted to be a doctor. And so he said, I think the class, Bill, needs a chart of the human skeletal system. Could you draw that up for us? So yeah, sure. Great. Or the class needs the human musculature system, or a cross-section of the eye, a cross-section of the ear. And what I didn't realize is I was teaching myself anatomy. So being a science math major ended up helping me enormously later in life when I became an artist and started to do prehistoric reconstructions, because I could read this. I had no problem reading the scientific papers, unlike most artists. And so it was just a perfect fit for me. So I was a science math major up until my very last semester of high school. And we had moved to a new town, and my previous high school in Reseda in the San Fernando Valley was great. I got a fantastic education there. But the new school I moved to was Thousand Oaks High School. It was horrible. Most of the teachers were there just because, not necessarily because they wanted to teach, because they were on tenure. So they get paid whether they taught or not. I had a math teacher who, as an experiment, I turned in the same math homework every day for an entire year, just changing the date, and he never noticed. So I thought, boy, I'm screwed. I'm going to graduate from high school. I'm going to be 2 years behind everybody else in med school because I'm not learning here. In fact, they used to try to enforce school spirit at the school, and attendance at pep rallies was mandatory. I would ditch the pep rallies and go to the library and try to educate myself, and they would give me detention for that. So anyway, I thought, what else do I like to do? Well, I love to draw. So my very last semester in high school, I changed my major from science and math to art. Now, I came from a very poor family. There was no way they could even afford to send me to a community college. But I lucked out. I got perfect scores on my SATs, and that combined with my parents' financial situation, the state of California gave me a full 4-year scholarship to any university I wanted to attend in the United States. So my friends thought I was nuts. They said, you could go to Harvard, you could go to Yale. You're choosing an art school? You're insane. The school I chose was California Institute of the Arts, colloquially called Cal Arts. We used to refer to it by its old name back then, its original name, the Chenard Art Institute. And so I graduated from high school, moved in with my dad that weekend, and on Monday started summer classes at the Chenard Art Institute, figure drawing. And I was an illustration major, and they had a great policy in the illustration department, which was that if you got any real work on the outside, you could turn that in lieu of your homework. Well, my last 2 years of art school was almost all real jobs, so it made the transition from academia to the real world seamless. It was just fantastic. I think Chenard or Cal Arts at the time was probably the greatest art school in the country. Edith Head was the head of the fashion department. She won more Oscars for fashion than any other person in history. The music department was overseen by Ravi Shankar. The animation department was taught by Disney's 9 old men, the 9 greatest animators who ever lived. The head of the illustration department, Hal Kramer, he was the first president of the Society of Illustrators. It was just an embarrassment of riches. I used to sneak into a lot of the other classes just to see what they were doing. It was fantastic.
Wow. Well, so that obviously led to a ton of paths. Like I said, I mean, you've drawn and created comic books, and with your film work, you've done a lot of concept art, storyboards, posters. I mean, a really impressive list of credits. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Conan, The Mist, The Prestige,
Pan's Labyrinth.
Pan's Labyrinth, Return of the Living Dead. I mean, there a whole lot of film work too. What led you to get involved with movies, and how did you land your first movie jobs?
It was completely accidental. I had no desire to make films. Actually, the first film I worked on, I was working with this incredible comedy group called the Firesign Theater, and they had recorded an album called Everything You Know Is Wrong, and they decided to make a movie out of it. So they already had the soundtrack, so we just shot and mimed to the soundtrack. And I built the props and set decoration and stuff, and was an extra in a party scene in the film. And that was my first dip into the film world, but it wasn't really a total dip. I was still doing all my illustration work. Then I got an offer to work on Buck Rogers. Originally, it was planned to be 3 2-hour movies for Europe on Buck Rogers. And in the middle of production, they decided to change their mind, and they decided to turn it into a television show. I was hired to design all kinds of stuff for the film. To me, it was just another illustration job, and that was the exact wrong attitude to take. I should have focused all my energies on that Buck Rogers film. Because I didn't, I got let off the film, which was pretty humiliating. And I think my real launch in the film business happened around 1979. I was a huge Conan the Barbarian fan. I had read all the Robert E. Howard books and loved the Frazetta paintings, and I was nuts about Conan. And a friend of mine, Bob Greenberg, was working as a production assistant for Ed Pressman, one of the producers on the Conan the Barbarian film. And he said, "Bill, you got to see what Ron Cobb is doing on Conan. He's the production designer." I said, "Ron Cobb? Ron Cobb's a political cartoonist. He did underground cartoons for the LA Free Press, which got distributed all over the nation and the world, actually." I thought, what would he be doing on Conan? I was really intrigued, but I was doing movie posters at the time, and I was doing so many posters, I did not have a spare second to take off and go see the work that Ron was doing. Finally got a break in my schedule. But instead of going to the Conan offices, I decided to go to the ABA, that's the American Booksellers Association. It was an event that happened every year, usually alternating between LA and New York. That year it happened to be in LA. And it's every single publisher and every single editor in the United States all in one big room. So for an illustrator, I could bring my portfolio and go booth to booth to booth and pick up enough work for the entire year. It was fantastic. So that was my goal. I walked into the ABA, and the first person I ran into was Ron Cobb. And he said, Bill, you are my first choice of who I want to work with on Conan in the art department, but I have an agreement with the writer-director, John Milius. He has veto power over anybody I want to bring in. I have veto power over anybody he wants to bring into the art department. So would you mind leaving your portfolio for John to see? And I thought, well, that might be fun, learn how movies are made. And I went in the next day, and Milius happened to be there. I handed him my book, and he looked through it. There was a story in there I had done for heavy metal, a Harlan Ellison story called Shattered Like a Glass Goblin that he remembered and he really liked. Quickly flipped through the rest, handed me back the book, and John's this bigger than life sort of character. And as he's walking out the doorway, he turns his head over his shoulder and says, hire him. So I walked in to see Buzz Feichens, our line producer, and Buzz told me what I would be making on Conan. And I nearly fell off the chair laughing because it was about 10% of what I was making in advertising. But I thought, well, it's just for 2 weeks. It'll be fun to see how movies are made. And what I found out later is they always hire you for 2 weeks. So I want to find out whether or not you're a jerk. If you're a jerk after the 2 weeks is over, your time is up and there's no hard feelings, the job's over. But if you're a cool guy and you really produce and you're, have a strong work ethic, they keep you on. So my 2 weeks on Conan turned into 2 years. And that was really the launch of my film career. And at the time, I was in an unbelievable situation. When I first walked into work, I was originally hired to do storyboards. Our receptionist was a young gal named Kathleen Kennedy. We were sharing offices with Steven Spielberg because John Milius was producing 1941 for Steven. So Ron Cobb and I would work on Conan during the day, put our pens down at 6 o'clock and walk across the hall to Steven's office and kick around ideas for Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was his next project. And I foolishly thought it would always be like that. So Kathy, she was amazing. She was our receptionist. Within 2 weeks, she was John Milius's personal assistant. And within 2 months after that, she was Steven Spielberg's personal assistant. And 2 years later, she produced E.T. So it was one of the fastest rises I've ever seen in the business. But man,
now she runs Lucasfilm.
Yes. And she's one of the hardest working people I've ever met. For instance, if Steven called her up at 4 a.m. and said, Kathy, I was just thinking about the filming tomorrow, and I think it'd be great if we had elephants. Her response wouldn't be, why in the hell are you waking me up at 4 in the morning asking for elephants? Her response would be, do you want Indian or African? And what color would you like those elephants? And they would be on set at 7 a.m.
It's amazing.
That kind of person.
So I am curious, when you're doing storyboards, concept art, how much interaction do you actually have with the director?
It's different for every film. With Conan, I got great direction from John Milius. Well, first I started doing traditional storyboards, and he goes, no, Bill, I love your comics work. Can you make them look like comic book pages? Sure, I can do that. And then I said, John, you want to give me input on what you want? He goes, no, you just draw this as if it was your own movie. And he said, I already know how I'm going to shoot every single scene in this film. I wrote the script, so I know what every scene is going to be. But if you come up with something different from me that's better than what I was going to do, I'll use it and I'll take credit for it, which I thought was pretty brilliant on his part.
So just out of curiosity, what directors would you say were the easiest or the best to work with?
Steve Miner, the Godzilla film. He was fantastic to work with. Guillermo del Toro was really easy to work with. Milius was really interesting.
Ain't that the truth?
If you've seen the documentary on him, that's a pretty good portrait of John.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Godzilla here in a second, but before we do that, you did a bunch of tribute art books to Willis O'Brien. Can you just kind of share with us maybe what influence or impact that that he had on your life and maybe your artwork itself?
Oh, sure. Willis O'Brien had a gigantic impact on my life. The very first movie I ever saw, I was 3 years old. My parents took me to the Reseda Drive-In to see a 1952 re-release of the original 1933 King Kong. That was the very first movie I ever saw. It was way years before we even had a television. And man, that movie hit me like a ton of bricks. It's still my favorite movie of all time. I've seen it easily over 100 times. And not long after that, I saw the Fantasia Rite of Spring sequence with the dinosaurs. But it was Kong that really hooked me on just the spectacle and the dinosaurs and the lush jungles and everything about that movie. I still am crazy about it. So I've been a Willis O'Brien fan for a long, long time. And when I was about, probably about 10 years old, I saw The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad with animation by Ray Harryhausen, who O'Brien was sort of a mentor to Ray. And I saw that film 7 times within 2 weeks. I was pretty nuts. I still love stop motion animation. It's one of my favorite things in film. It's just incredible. So anyway, King Kong, I've been King Kong nut ever since. And I do these sketchbooks, and sometimes I'll theme the sketchbook. And I did 2 Willis O'Brien sketchbooks, just focusing on, I was trying to portray every creature he ever animated in every film that he's worked on. And so that was the gist of that. So the first one had a lot of his silent stuff, Lost World, but it also had King Kong and Son of Kong. Second volume had the giant behemoth and Mighty Joe Young and
Black Scorpion, probably.
Yeah, Black Scorpion. Yep. That was another key film of his. And I've got a third volume plan, which is going to be all the films he wanted to do but never got to do.
There's a lot of those.
Yeah, I made a list. It's huge. It's going to be a pretty thick book.
Yeah, it's important. Even though we're talking about Godzilla and things like that. I mean, without King Kong and Willis O'Brien, that genre, you say the kaiju genre wouldn't exist, and so many careers wouldn't exist, including yours.
Oh, yeah.
So in a way, I mean, he's a big part of why we're all here to begin with. Mm-hmm. But yeah, of course, speaking about Godzilla, how familiar were you with the Godzilla films when you were offered to be involved in the 1983 movie? Were you a fan at all? Did you have a history of watching those?
I had seen most of the kaiju films. I was not a huge fan because I could always tell it was a guy in a sort of a loose, dumpy suit, which bothered me. I wanted it to look more realistic. And, actually my favorite Japanese horror film is the Attack of the Mushroom People.
Oh, it's a great
I love that one. It's a terrific film. But I remember trying to see Godzilla when it first came out, and I was in a long line to get into the theater, and they cut the line off about 10 people in front of me. So I didn't get to see it in the theater. And I think the same thing happened with Rodan too. One of the interesting things about working with Steve Miner on our Godzilla project was if we had made it, the plan was for me to direct Rodan next. So, bummer.
Did you any specific ideas you had for that you could share with us?
Oh, a Rodan?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, like Godzilla, I was going to make each of those creatures as realistic as possible, so they were completely believable. It would not look like a puppet. It would not look like a guy in a suit. So I would use a lot of what I've learned in doing paleontological and prehistoric life reconstructions in designing those creatures. So just injecting a bit of nature into them, I think, would have made them even more appealing and interesting.
Did you ever did that idea of doing, if this does well, we'll do a Rodan, did that ever lead to any story ideas back then? No. Did you ever get that far?
Nope. It was just something that Steve said in passing, and I thought, wow, well, that's cool.
It's interesting that even in 1983, like now that happens all the time. Like, if this Batman movie does well, we'll do a Superman or whatever, right. And combine them into some universe. You guys kind of had a an earlier version of that, of what they're doing now with, you know, the MonsterVerse that Legendary is doing. If you have you ever thought about that though? Like, if you could make a Rodan movie, what do you know? Have any idea what maybe your story pitch might be?
No, I haven't given it any thought whatsoever, other than I would really have fun redesigning Rodan. So he still looked like Rodan, but just more realistic.
Yeah. And have you directed before? Would that have been a first for you?
That would have been my first directing gig. Yep.
All right. Well, someone call Toho and Legendary Pictures and tell them Bill's ready.
Yeah, I would still love to make that movie so much. It's the greatest film I worked on that never got made. It was just a great script by Fred Decker.
So what were your initial thoughts on that script? Because it has some of the things that make Godzilla, you know, it has, you know, themes around, you know, nuclear radiation, but it also does feel distinctly almost like Hollywood. What were your thoughts when you first read that, when they sent that to you?
I was blown away. I thought it was one of the better scripts I'd ever read in the business. And initially, I was hired to do one presentation painting. Presentation painting is a piece of art that you show when you're doing a pitch for a film, because a lot of people in the studios, they're not going to read your script. They don't have time for that, or they don't have the interest in that. But anybody will look at a picture. So that used to be a big part of my career, was doing presentation paintings. I worked with a producer named Sandy Howard. He would come to me every year. He'd have 10 film titles. Wouldn't have any scripts, just the titles. And he'd say, okay, Bill, Terror Train, teenage girls terrorized on a train. And so I do a piece of art to go with that. And so with the 10 pieces of art and the 10 titles, he would go to the Cannes Film Festival or to the MIFED Festival in Italy, and you get the financing for all 10 films. It was a lot easier back then to get financing for films. So Steve had heard about my reputation, and so I did a big panoramic Godzilla painting showing Godzilla attacking San Francisco and Godzilla being attacked by jets and all kinds of stuff. And then Steve found out I had done storyboards. I had storyboarded all the action sequences for First Blood. I obviously had storyboarded a lot of Conan the Barbarian. And so he hired me to start doing storyboards. Well, these, you know, the storyboards on every film are different. Sometimes they're stick figures, sometimes they're little panels, postage stamp size. But this time when I was working on Godzilla, these were fairly large panels that I was doing. And I remember that the greatest living storyboard artist at the time was a good friend of mine, Mentor Hubner. And he was visiting my studio, and he saw the Godzilla pieces that I was doing. And he said, oh my God, the detail you're putting into these storyboards, you're really designing the film. I mean, there's so much here. They could just practically shoot what you're drawing. Have you thought of becoming the production designer for the film? And I hadn't, but he put that bug in my brain. I called up Steve and I said, Steve, consider me for possibly being the production designer for the motion picture. Well, Steve did the smart thing. He called all around town, called all the people I had worked with, and I got a good report from everybody. And so he said, okay, you are now the production designer. And I got a raise, which was nice. And so I started to assemble this incredible art department. I had Dave Stevens, the creator of The Rocketeer, and Doug Wildey, the creator of Johnny Quest, doing storyboards with me, because we had to board nearly every scene because there was effects in almost every scene in the film. And until you have storyboards, you can't get a realistic budget, because what you're describing to someone else, they might have a totally different picture in their mind as to what you're thinking of. But once you got storyboards, that kind of everybody's on the same page. So hired Rick Baker to start building me a gigantic robotic Godzilla head. Hired David Allen to do the stop motion animation for Godzilla. Steve Cherkas at that time was a filmmaker, but he was also starting a career and as a paleontology sculptor. I got him to sculpt the Godzilla, that one that you were showing me holding. He made a foam rubber model that had, you know, all the gears and steel skeleton inside, so you could pose it and move it and make stop motion animation with it. So it was a dream. It was really fantastic.
That's a really incredible ensemble of talent. And I know earlier you kind of mentioned that Steve Miner was really great to work with. Can you just elaborate for us about your relationship with him specific to this project and what it was like?
Well, Steve put a lot of trust in me, and I tried to repay that trust by doing my absolute best work. And in fact, I remember I was storyboarding the end of the film. Godzilla ends up dying on Alcatraz, and I even put together some audio tapes to go with the storyboards. And Steve, it seemed like he had not realized how important music was. And for me, music was hugely important in motion pictures, mostly because I was so affected by Max Steiner's score for King Kong and Bernard Herrmann's scores for the Harryhausen films. And so he saw that I was not just storyboarding, I was looking at the total picture, the total package, and trying to bring all of that to life. And he was very enthusiastic and very positive.
So obviously redesigning Godzilla is always, something that, that's always takes some work. What was your approach to how Godzilla should look in this film? I know you said, you wanted him to feel more like a real creature as opposed to a fantasy kind of creation, but just what was your overall approach to this design?
My goal was to come up with a Godzilla that the public would immediately recognize as Godzilla, but it would not look like a guy in a dumpy suit. It would look like a real animal, a real creature. And so I borrowed parts of what I knew about dinosaur anatomy and the construction of Godzilla, but never forgetting that it still had to look like Godzilla. And so the main thing that separated my Godzilla from the Toho Godzilla were the legs. It had real dinosaur legs. It didn't have those big fat legs. So that's the picture you just put up. That's Godzilla on Alcatraz being attacked by a helicopter.
The big catalyst for the story in this is Godzilla is looking for his lost child who had been killed by the military. Godzilla doesn't know that.
Right.
There's a lot of cool stuff in there with, the scientists that come in contact with the body, get radiation, sickness, and stuff like that. But that also recalls kind of like things like the movie Gorgo. Do you know if either Fred or Steve, if Gorgo was something that inspired the parental element of Godzilla in this?
I don't know, because I never talked about that with Steve or with Fred. I just accepted Fred's screenplay as, okay, this is what we're doing, and I went to work on it. So yeah, I don't know if Gorgo was an influence or not, but they do have that baby thing, which I think also didn't Spielberg use that in The Lost World as well?
Yeah. After Gorgo, there's like a slew of movies that lift things like that. Even some of the Godzilla movies that did get made kind of have certain elements of that too.
Yeah, they could have called him Not the Baby.
Since you did all the different storyboards for the film, were there any specific script sequences that maybe have been your favorite or would have been your favorite?
Oh, absolutely. There was a scene. Well, the main protagonist in the film, well, there's two. There's a boy who's about 13, 14 years old. And there's his father, who's this sort of tough, sort of Navy SEAL, I can do anything kind of guy. And there's a scene where the boy, he's got a pet iguana in his backpack that he takes with him everywhere. He has a very close relationship with this cute little lizard. And he ends up stumbling. It's late at night, and he's walking on the rocks on the shore, and he comes upon Godzilla. And Godzilla looks down at him, not knowing exactly what this kid is. And the kid looks up at Godzilla. And at that moment, the iguana crawls out of the backpack and is sitting on the kid's shoulder. And Godzilla sees that the kid basically the kid is kind to reptiles, and there's a connection. There's a real connection between the boy and this giant monster, and it's a real magical, mystical sequence in the film. And at one point, the boy turns away, and when he turns back, Godzilla has disappeared. So he's not even sure if he saw it for real, if it was a dream, or if he actually made a connection with Godzilla. But later, it's that connection that the boy has to use to kill Godzilla, and it just tears the kid apart. But it's either his father in the world or Godzilla, and he knows that it's Godzilla that has to die. And it's a heart-wrenching sequence. It's really incredible.
That sounds like it would be really just interesting. I would have loved to have seen that played out, obviously, in the film. But I want to talk about the special effects for just a moment. How do you envision, the different special effects methods available at that time? How would those have been used to complete the film?
Well, for me, special effects, I use whatever serves the project best, or whatever serves the project best within the budget that we were working under. Obviously, you can't do a lot of stuff that's way out of your budget. So I'm also, when I was working on the Conan films, I didn't know it, but the De Laurentiis family was grooming me to become a production designer. They admired my cheekiness. I was privately studying Italian and learning Italian so I could eavesdrop on all the stuff they were saying. And they thought that was hilarious. They thought that was great. And so they started to train me to become a production designer. And one of the things I loved about working for them is they used a lot of real old school special effects techniques. One of my favorite things that we did, it's called a hanging miniature. It's where you hang a miniature in front of the camera, and the actors can move underneath it. And if you do it right, it looks like that miniature is actually in the distance and part of the scene. So we used that a few times in the second Conan film. And I'm open to, I love old school effects because, well, for one, once you shoot it, you got it in the can. There's not this attitude, which is so currently prevalent, of, oh, we'll fix it in post-production. Yeah. No, it's, let's get it in the can now so we don't have to go through all that fixing. And that's always been my approach to film. Do what's most effective, do what's most realistic, and do it within the budget that you've got.
With this particular Godzilla story, how do you feel about some of the changes made to Godzilla? For example, the thing that sticks out for me is in this project, he was killed by the missiles, and when they did something like that in the 1998 movie, people lost their minds. This isn't Godzilla. Godzilla can't be killed by the military like that. Was that something that you were ever, I don't know, did you ever feel like nervous that might be something that maybe longtime fans wouldn't react to that well, or were you just kind of going for more of a realistic animal kind of approach?
Well, I think that the Godzilla project itself was the exact right thing to do, because in general, I hate remakes because you're always disappointed, especially if it's a favorite film of yours. The fact, as soon as they announce there's going to be a remake, you're pissed off.
Right.
But that's because they always try to remake great films. Well, don't remake a great film. Remake a film with a great premise and with great promise that wasn't done very well in the first place. And the Godzilla project was perfect for that, because the Toho effects were really subpar compared to American special effects. And the idea was, let's let the public think that they're going to see a Toho Godzilla movie. And then once they're in the theater, you give them the Spielbergian expanse and realism and spectacle that they're not prepared for, and it will just blow their minds. And Fred's writing was so good. I think that Godzilla being killed, obviously it would upset people, but I think it would the way we were going to do it, it would upset them in the right way, and that it would tear their heart out to see this happen. And I think the public would be so emotionally involved. I think they would totally buy the end of the film.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be more sentimentality around Godzilla in this than there are in a lot of the existing Godzilla movies. So I can see that. Do you know how hands-on? Because I think Toho were even putting up some of the financing. Do you know how hands-on were they in the development of the script, or how much input they might have given?
I don't think we got any input from Toho, actually. I think
that's like so much different from how Toho is now. You know?
Well, yeah, Steve bought the rights to do an American Godzilla film.
Yeah.
And that was it. We just started making our own film.
So I know that the projected budget was something like 30 million, which back then was
a lot. Was a huge,
insane. Yeah.
And that's part of what sunk the project.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, why did the project get canceled? Was it all over budgetary concerns?
Yes, it was two things. It was budgetary concerns. Obviously, this was going to be a very expensive film. There was effect shots in almost every scene, and at that time, 4 big budget films tanked. Heaven's Gate being the most prominent one.
Yep.
And so, for that time period, all the studios were like, "Oh, big budget film? No way." And so Steve would have to start the whole process of pitching all over again, working his way up the chain of command in each different studio. And when he'd finally get to the end guy, they'd say, big budget? No, we're not going to do it. So that was frustrating. The other thing was Steve, they didn't know if Steve could pull this off as a director, because prior to that, he had directed 2 Friday the 13th movies. And they were like, well, yeah, he can direct a low budget horror film, but can he direct a huge budget sci-fi fantasy film?
Mm-hmm.
And well, it turned out later, yeah, he really could, because subsequent to Godzilla, he directed a lot of films that showed he had really great director chops. So that would have turned out not to be a problem, but they didn't want to make the risk.
Yeah, that's interesting. Especially, you know, Godzilla. I guess Godzilla is a little less risky now. I mean, there's all these big American movies and merch. Like back then, you know, there was barely any Godzilla merchandise, and now there's such a following. Like there's Godzilla Monopoly. You know, it's a lot different these days.
Yeah, and also back then, you have to remember too that science fiction and fantasy films were just starting to come into their own because of Star Wars and Alien, but they hadn't really totally taken over the market the way it has today. Where, I mean, you know, in high school, if you're going to see a superhero movie, your fellow high schoolmates will laugh at you. They make fun of you for wanting to see a superhero film. And now that is so mainstream. That's what drives.
Right. It's all that comes out.
Yeah. Crazy.
Well, I know that you worked as an advisor for the original Jurassic Park, but you were also going to play a really heavy part in the canceled Jurassic Park animated series in the early 90s. Can you tell us what that project would have been like? Yeah,
well, Universal Cartoon Studios was going to do the project. They made me the production designer for the show. It was going to be a primetime animated series. They're taken very seriously. And they were using some CG in it, mostly for the animation of the vehicles. And they told me they wanted me to design it so it looked very much like a European graphic novel. And I had a huge collection of European comics, so that was no problem giving it that look. But the big problem became that they shot a beautiful trailer showing just what the animation was going to look like, what the characters would look like, some of the action scenes and stuff. Great trailer. But Steven Spielberg would not even look at the trailer. By that time, he had been so inundated with Jurassic Park merchandising and stuff, he was just sick of it, and he didn't want to see any more Jurassic Park stuff.
Well, speaking of dinosaurs, you also had some involvement with the Disney film Dinosaur for several years. How different was that project when you worked on it compared to the actual final version?
that was a funny project because they first sent me the script in I think 1988 or 1989, and I read it. And I go, oh, well, cool, dinosaur films. This is great. Hope they don't talk. And then I was talking to Disney, and they made it sound like I was going to start the following Monday, but then I didn't hear anything from them until a year goes by, and they said, Bill, we've got this great dinosaur film we want you to be the designer on. We're going to send it over to you. I read it. It was the same script. And they did this to me every year for about 10 or 12 years to the point where I just got blasé. Oh, that movie again. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd like to do it. I know it's not going to happen. But then they said, no. One time they said, no, this really, really, really is going to happen. We've got the financing for it. Disney's gung ho. We're going to make this movie. And then once again, I didn't hear from them. And until about 6 months later, I get a call from one of their attorneys, and they said, Bill, we just want you to know we're dying to have you on the film, and we're just working out the details of the contract. The big problem is you're insisting that you work at home. Well, I had never insisted that I work at home. And I told them that. I said, I don't know where you're getting that information from, but I'll be happy to work at the studio. And I said, I like being close to the director, so if there's any changes made, I can immediately incorporate them into my work. So they said, really? You can work at the studio? That is great. Fantastic. We're going to push this right through. Well, another 7 months goes by. I get a call from a different attorney. I'm working on this dinosaur contract. We really want you to work on this. And the big problem is you're insisting that you have to work in the studio. I said, and they said, yeah, the unions would kill us. And I said, well, I could work at home. You could work at home? That's great. And then, of course, I didn't hear from them for another 5 months. Finally, they called, and it was actually becoming a real project. I was no longer the production designer, but they said, look, we want you to design all the characters for the film. They said, this is a movie about iguanodons, and to us, all iguanodons look alike. Can you design a family of iguanodons that the public can immediately identify who's who? And I said, I love tough problems like that. I said, yeah, I can do that. And so I did. I did just that. I designed this whole family of these dinosaurs, and I made them each really distinctive in the way that they look, so the public would have no problem whatsoever seeing who was who. And then, so I worked on that for many, many, many months. And then several months later, when it looked like the film was going to come out, I called to make sure I was getting credit. And they said, oh, no, we're not going to give you any credit. I said, why not? I designed all the characters. They said, well, we decided on a 5-year cutoff. Anyone who worked on the film more than 5 years ago doesn't get credit. I said, well, that's a little arbitrary, folks. And so I said, let me send you a letter. And so I wrote down 14 points as to why they should give me a credit in the film. And because of that, they did.
Okay. You'd mentioned a trailer for that Jurassic Park series. Do you know if that ever surfaced anywhere?
I've got a copy.
But it's not on YouTube or anything, right?
I think it was on YouTube for a brief period of time. For like a couple of months, it was on YouTube.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a really wonderful trailer.
I have to ask because I think a lot of kids my age, we remember Dino Riders, and I know that you had worked on that series. Can you kind of just tell us about your involvement?
Yeah. Anytime there's a dinosaur television show for kids, they feel compelled to hire a paleontologist so that later when people say, well, this isn't educational, they say, hey, we hired a paleontologist. So it's a lot of scientific information in this film that's good for your kids. Well, they only want the name. They only want the title. I mean, I was hired to oversee the accuracy of Dino Riders, and there wasn't any. But I was diligent. I pointed out, I said, look, you have this happening. This could never happen, but here's a substitution that'll work just great. Or if you've got for instance, a sauropod from the Jurassic, and now you're in the Cretaceous, well, you can't call it by that name. You have to but there are sauropods that did exist in the Cretaceous, and I'll hook you up with that name. But that they really didn't want to hear from me at all. They just wanted my name in the credits, paleontological advisor, and so it didn't happen. I did a little more with Dink the Little Dinosaur. They had something called bumpers. There'd be a Dink story, and just before the commercial break, there'd be what they call a bumper, which is a short little informational bit, which was all science. And so I ended up designing all of those for Dink the Little Dinosaur, but they didn't include him in the Blu-ray. So it's frustrating because I'd love to have copies of those.
So you're telling me for Dino Riders, they were concerned about accuracy for a show where dinosaurs shoot lasers and stuff with armor? That's
what they told me.
Oh, man.
Well, speaking of dinosaurs, I think one of the things you're most recognized for is being a paleo artist, and you've done tons of dinosaur drawings, comics. But I do have to ask, what is your opinion on scientific accuracy in portraying dinosaurs in TV and film? For example, every time a Jurassic Park movie comes out, the internet is fighting over, how they don't have feathers. They're obligated to be accurate. Well, they're not because it's a movie. What's your stance on the accuracy of dinosaurs in media?
Well, if it's my movie, they've got to be accurate. But since I'm not producing any dinosaur movies, I'm at the whim of being hired by people who may not know as much about dinosaurs as myself. It was funny. I received this mysterious package in the mail one day. It was a loose leaf novel. And there's a note on the top that said, read this book. Don't look at the last page until you've read the whole thing. So, well, that's sort of curious. So I started reading it. Well, it was, before it was published, basically someone had sent me the manuscript to Jurassic Park. And so I'm reading it. I'm going, oh my God, if they ever make a movie of this, I'd be the perfect production designer, because I know all the characters that Michael Crichton based his characters on. They're all friends of mine. The lead paleontologist, that's Jack Horner. I would even know how to dress him. And then there's the theme park aspect. I had just spent 2.5 years designing theme parks for Disney and Universal. So I thought, God, well, I'm also the theme park guy. And then I get to the end of the book, and on the very last page, there is an acknowledgement to me from Michael Crichton as an inspiration for the book. And I thought, I am so screwed. There's a Hollywood axiom: the more perfect you are for a project, the less likely it is you'll do it. There's another Hollywood axiom that says, if you try to get a job, you'll never get that job. But this was such a perfect film project for me that when it was announced that Steven was going to do Jurassic Park, I actually tried to get the job, which of course I didn't get. Part of the problem was what I knew about dinosaurs. The powers that be were afraid that Steven would want something that was fantastic, like say a Tyrannosaurus that was 3 or 4 times the size of a real one, and that I would shoot him down as because of what I knew about dinosaurs. But I'm not an idiot. I wouldn't do that. I know that there's making movies, and there's making documentaries, and there's making sci-fi fantasy movies, and you just bend with the wind as to what you put on the screen. If Steven wants to do a T-Rex that's 3 times the size of a regular T-Rex, go for it, man.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that perspective from someone that actually does work on dinosaur things. Getting back to the world of Godzilla, you later kind of got back into that world as a writer on the animated series from TriStar in 1998. You're credited with writing the episode "Where Is Thy Sting," which was the one about the giant scorpions. How'd you get involved with that project?
Well, I was pitching a lot of shows around town, and I had this great agent, John Goldsmith, and he connected me with the Godzilla TV series. I think some of his clients were working on it, and so that's how I got the gig of writing "Where's Thy Sting." It was fantastic. And it was such a different experience from making movies. In movies, there's a joke that this actress was so stupid that she fucked the writer, showing basically it's an example of how little power the writer has in motion pictures. They're often barred from the set. However, in animation, the writer is king. I couldn't believe it. I went, they called me up. They said, we're going to be taping your show, taping the audio portion of the show this Thursday. So come down. And so I drove down, and it was set up like an old radio show where there was a recording booth, and all the actors were sitting. There was about a dozen actors sitting in chairs each with a microphone. And they handed me my script. And they said, okay, we're going to do a run through. Anything you don't like, let us know and we'll change it. I go, what? you know I'm the writer, right? You go, yeah, you're the writer. You know that. And I said, so the director doesn't have a problem with that? And the director was standing right next to me, and she said, hey, you wrote the script. You know more about these characters than anyone here. And I was like, wow. I felt like I just stepped into Oz or something. It was so different, completely different from the movie business. So that was one of the big thrills for me, was actually working on that. And they also cast Michael Chiklis as the general, and
yep,
great actor. So it was fun, and I gave him a little input. There was I had a bit of the Navajo language in the story, and so I pronounced the Navajo words for the actors doing the Navajo parts.
That's pretty cool. So what was, I mean, you kind of talked about how great it was to have the creative control as the writer, but what was the actual process for writing that episode, and how familiar were you with the show up to that point and with the 98 film going in?
I had never seen the show, but one of the guys working on it, Bob Skier, he was a huge fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, as was I. And he said, we're really trying to write the dialogue so it's as snappy as Buffy dialogue. I said, wow, that's quite the challenge, and I hope I'm up to it. So it was a group of smart guys making really cool Godzilla cartoons.
Did you have a lot of interaction with the artists and producers at that time as well?
No, I didn't. The only thing is I pitched 3 different storylines, and then they chose the one that got made.
Do you remember what the other 2 were like? Would you be able to talk about those at all?
I remember one of them was about this, the protagonist, the villain, or the bad guy creature, was this creature that it kept growing, and if you cut off part of it, it would immediately grow back, and it would grow back larger. And it was constantly, its form was changing and growing and shedding and growing and growing. So that's about all I remember from that. I don't remember what the other pitch was.
What made you choose scorpions for your episode?
Probably Willis O'Brien's Black Scorpion.
Black Scorpion. Yeah, I figured that was going to be the answer. I just wanted to kind of hear it. No, that series is great. I think it's one of the more underrated and underappreciated pieces of Godzilla media, and I still hear fans saying like, "Oh, I skipped it when it came out because I didn't like the 98 movie, but this is totally different. It's what the movie should have been." So for people out there, I encourage people to check it out if they haven't. It's really, really good.
Yeah, nice designs, nice art as well.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic series. So speaking of giant monster things, I know you also did some conceptual work for a short film about giant monsters called Monster Roll. Was that ever intended to be a full film? As it exists right now, is kind of sort of like a short mixed with a trailer. It's almost like it almost feels like a sizzle reel.
Yeah, it kind of is. The writer director is Dan Blank. Dan was a regular in my figure drawing workshop until COVID came along. Every Sunday you could come to my studio and I would have naked gals posing and we do figure drawing. And Dan was one of those guys. And he was working, I think he'd been nominated for an Oscar or won an Oscar for a short animated film that he made. I think it was called Shadow Play, and it was about World War II when we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A lot of the people, the force of the explosion and the heat, it burned them onto the sides of buildings. You could see their silhouettes and some the textures of some of the clothing that they wore. So he had done a cartoon about that, which was just incredible. Anyway, he told me he was doing this new thing called Monster Roll, and he wanted to do that sizzle reel because Lucasfilm was really interested in the project. And actually, before he even made the reel, they were ready to finance it. And I said, man, you should just go for it, start making this, because you may not get that opportunity again. He says, no, I want to make the sizzle reel because I want to show exactly what the film is going to look like. And it's fantastic. If you guys have seen it, it's just like it's scary and funny at the same time, which is often tough to pull off.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it, but maybe a year or two ago, someone sent me the link, the YouTube link, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I don't know. Do you feel like there's any realism behind that maybe coming to fruition one day?
Well, I was thinking about Dan yesterday. I really want to contact him and find out what's going on with that project because I think it's a great, great project. A lot of my stuff got used in that footage. Like I designed the tattoo that you see in the very first scene that's on the sumo guy's back. And then there's glimpses of some of the big creatures as well. And I designed all of those too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for people watching us, that's on YouTube if you look up Monster Roll. But yeah, I would love to see that get resurrected into something bigger.
Yeah. The basic idea for the folks out there who haven't seen it is that the Japanese sea gods are angry with what the humans have done to the oceans. And so they are out to now seek revenge. The first place they hit is Los Angeles, and our first line of defense is the sushi chefs. But the sushi chefs try to say that 3 times really fast. The sushi chefs have this code, though, that whatever you kill, you must eat. So they're killing these gigantic monsters and slicing them and making sashimi out of them. It's kind of wacky.
It sounds awesome, actually. I'd watch that. So you worked on a ton of different, movies, films, etc.
Yeah, then 75 films.
And any that stick out to you, many become classics, any films that stick out to you as being your favorite or maybe you're the most proud of?
Well, one of the hardest films I made was a low-budget film, Return of the Living Dead. And that's become a gigantic cult movie. And I'm really proud of that. It really holds up.
One of my favorites.
Yeah,
and they have a screening in LA. It sells out within minutes. And boy, that was just it's a unique film. Jon Stewart used to quote from that film every week on The Daily Show. And boy, it's just, I don't know, it's a Dan O'Bannon masterpiece.
I love that
Indeed.
movie.
Yeah.
I'm actually really glad you brought it up because I wanted to ask. I know you put a lot of thought into how you actually created the zombies to make them different from Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, we want them to not look like Romero zombies at all.
And there was something I thought that was pretty interesting. You mentioned that you wanted them to have a lot of speed. So essentially they weren't survivable in any way.
Right.
Can you just kind of elaborate on maybe what your creative process was and maybe talk a little bit specifically about Tarman? Because I mean, not just the way that he looks, but the way that the actor portrays him is so unique and I just think really mesmerizing.
Well, Dan O'Bannon, the writer-director, came to me and said, Bill, you know how films have principal actors? I go, yeah. He says, our film's going to have principal zombies. I want you to design zombies that no one has ever seen. I want them to be unique. I want them to, not look like George Romero zombies, just dark rings around their eyes. And so first one I did was the Tarman. I just, with me, whenever I get a job as a designer, the script becomes the Bible. That's what motivates and directs me to do what I need to do. And so I did my first drawings of the Tar Man and showed them to Dan, and Dan said, "Man, you nailed it. This is great." Well, I have, whenever I work on a film and design creature suits, I have a rule: never ever use a stuntman in a creature suit. Always use an actor, because an actor will bring that suit to life. I give 50% of the credit of the Tar Man to Alan Troutman, the guy, the actor who was inside that suit. He could move as though his bones were connected. He was just phenomenal. And he really brought that suit to life in a way that no stuntman ever could.
Well, as our time kind of comes to a close, are there any projects that are coming up that you would like to talk about or share with us?
Sure. I'm working on a big 3-volume set, each volume being about 350 pages, a box set of all my comics related art. I don't think I'm known for that because I bounce around in the business so much that people think comics, he's probably maybe done a couple stories, but no, I think people are going to be really surprised. It's being published by my regular publisher, Flesk Publishing. I'm also, over COVID, I finished my second blues book. The first volume I did was called Legends of the Blues. It's 100 portraits and biographies of my favorite blues musicians born prior to 1930. And over COVID, I did this the second volume, which is Legends of the British Blues. All those English, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh cats who brought our own music back to us without us realizing it was our own music. Third volume is going to be Modern Legends of the Blues. So Jimi Hendrix, Jack White, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Paul Butterfield, guys like that. Then I translated a book of poems by my favorite poet. There's a Chilean poet named Pablo Neruda. He wrote a book called Stones of the Sky. I was dissatisfied with the translation, so I did a new translation. Then I did an illustration for every one of the poems. So that'll be coming out. My most requested book I'm in the middle of, and that is a book on all my music related art. So it's all the album covers and CD covers I've done, band flyers, concert posters, stuff like that. So keep them busy. Eventually later, years down the line, I'm going to do a whole book on all my film design and a whole book on all my entertainment advertising.
Great.
That'll have all my movie posters.
As our audience can tell, we barely scratched the surface of your career. But can you tell us where people can find more information about your work, where they can purchase maybe some of your books? I know you have, I think you have a website that you currently maintain.
It's pretty easy, williamstout.com. And there's a shop on the website, which, boy, during COVID, sales skyrocketed. I guess people were sequestered and bored and wanted to escape somehow. So they went to the internet and bought some of my books.
Nice.
So, yeah, my big book, the one I would recommend to anyone not familiar with my work that wants to become familiar, is a book called Fantastic Worlds. It was published by Insight Editions. It's a huge book, 6 pounds. It's got 400 pages, and I think, 500, 600, 700 pieces of art inside. Each chapter is on a different aspect of my career. So there's a chapter on dinosaurs, a chapter on theme park design, a chapter on film design, a chapter on comics, and so on. So I'm real proud of that book. For a book that huge to have so few errors in it, I'm amazed.
Well, listen, Bill, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining Kaiju Masterclass. It's been an honor to have you on.
Yeah, you guys had great questions.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks so much, Bill.
And to our audience, Kaiju Masterclass will continue. You can go to kaijumasterclass.com and see a full slate of programming. And thank you for watching.
All right. So long, folks.
Bye, guys.